Elias Ward reined in his horse so hard the animal snorted in protest. Ahead, sprawled across the cracked red earth, lay a human form half buried in dust. At first glance, it looked lifeless, but something in the shape of the body made Elias's stomach tighten. It was a woman, a tall Apache woman. Her powerful frame was coated in dirt and dried blood, her dark skin marked by swollen purple scars that crossed her shoulders and back in cruel lines. Her wrists were bound with a torn strip of leather, rubbed raw where she had struggled. Each breath she took was shallow and uneven, as if her lungs were fighting just to stay open. The desert heat shimmered around them, pressing down like a weight. Elias slid from the saddle and dropped to one knee beside her, his boots sinking into hot sand. His eyes flicked across the horizon. Empty. Too empty. This could be a trap. He had been warned before. The Apache tribes in this territory did not welcome outsiders interfering in their judgments. Elias knew that. He had lived long enough to know when to keep his head down. But the faint rise and fall of her chest would not let him ride on. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck. The pulse there was weak, so weak it nearly vanished beneath his touch. "If I leave you," he muttered, voice rough, "the sun will finish the job." His jaw clenched. With a sharp motion, he pulled the knife from his belt and sliced through the leather binding. Then, with a grunt, he lifted her. She was heavy, solid muscle beneath the injuries, like hauling a full-grain sack across his shoulders. Elias threw her across the saddle and swung up behind her, kicking his horse forward. Red dust exploded into the air as they bolted across the plain. He did not look back. Anyone watching would already know he had chosen a side. By the time the cabin came into view, the sky was bleeding into evening. Elias rode straight through the crooked wooden gate and dismounted in a rush. Inside, the air was cooler, thick with the smell of old wood and ash. He laid her gently on a worn blanket near the cold hearth and moved fast. Firewood cracked as flames came to life, throwing flickering light across his sun-scorched face. He dipped a rag into the last of his water supply, precious as gold in this dry land, and wiped the dust and blood from her skin. Her breathing steadied just enough to ease the knot in his chest. Elias Ward had once been a family man. Years ago, sickness swept across the plains and took his wife and 2 young boys. Since then, he had lived like a shadow, tending cattle, avoiding towns, avoiding people. Pain was easier to survive alone. Tonight, that rule was broken. The woman stirred faintly. Her strength was obvious even now. Broad shoulders, thick arms, the build of someone trained for survival. The scars on her back spoke of punishment, not battle. Elias knew enough to understand what that meant. If her people came looking, they would not knock. Night fell fast. Wind hissed through the gaps in the cabin walls. Elias cleaned her wounds as best he could, then sat back with his rifle across his lap, eyes fixed on the door. Sometime after midnight, movement snapped him awake. The woman sat up with a sharp gasp, eyes wild. In one swift motion, she grabbed the small knife near the stove. Steel flashed in the firelight. Elias did not move. "If you're going to use that," he said calmly, lifting his hands, "do it clean, but if you want to live, put it down." Her chest heaved as she scanned the room. The cabin was small, worn, but not a cage. Her gaze locked onto him, tall, lean, unarmed except for honesty in his eyes. "I cut your bonds," Elias continued. "You're free to leave, but out there—" He nodded toward the darkness. "Only sand and death." Her grip trembled. Slowly the knife slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. Her strength gave out, and she slumped forward. Elias stepped in, picked up the blade, and placed a bowl of water in her hands. "Drink." She did, carefully, watching him over the rim like a wounded animal. Without another word, Elias moved outside and sat on the porch, rifle across his knees. Smoke from his cigarette curled into the moonlight. Inside, the woman, Takina, did not sleep. Each time fear pulled her awake, she saw him still there, not guarding her like a jailer, not abandoning her like the others. By dawn, something unfamiliar stirred in her chest. Safety. When the sky began to pale, Elias spoke softly without turning. "You can stay until you're strong, or you can go. Choice is yours." Takina said nothing. She only tightened the blanket around her shoulders, and that was answer enough. Morning light crept slowly over the prairie, pale gold spilling across the cracked earth and the weathered cabin roof. Takina stepped outside for the first time without support. Her shoulder was still bound tightly, the fabric stained dark where blood had once seeped through, but she stood tall, strong, unbroken. Elias was already awake. He worked near the fence line, hammer striking old wood with steady rhythm. He did not look up when she emerged. He never stared, never hovered. That, she noticed. "You're steadier today," he said evenly. "Water's behind the cattle pen. If you want food, help yourself after." No kindness wrapped in pity, just facts. Takina nodded once and moved toward the water tank. The bucket groaned as she hauled it up, her thick arms flexing beneath skin darkened by sun and hardship. Elias paused mid-swing, glancing over despite himself. Most men he knew would still be laid out for days after wounds like hers. She carried the water without spilling a drop. The day passed mostly in silence. Takina followed Elias as he patched the fence and sealed cracks in the cabin walls with mud and straw. She watched closely, learned quickly. When Elias stopped to rest, she stepped forward without a word, took the hammer, and finished the job. He studied her for a long moment, then simply nodded. That evening, when the sun dipped low and shadows stretched long, Takina lit the cooking fire herself. She prepared a simple stew from rabbit and dried roots. When she placed the bowl in front of Elias, he looked from the food to her face. A silent nod passed between them. From that night on, the cabin was no longer quiet. The sound of work filled the air, wood splitting, stone stacking, wind barriers rising. Takina's strength reshaped the land faster than Elias thought possible. In one afternoon, she rebuilt an entire section of fence the storms had destroyed months earlier. One evening, they sat on the porch watching the sky burn orange and red. Elias rolled a cigarette. Takina sharpened a small blade with slow, practiced movements. She spoke at last. "Why did you save me?" Elias stared at the fields, dry and cracked like old scars. "Because I couldn't watch someone die alone. I've buried enough ghosts." Takina absorbed that. Something inside her loosened. That night she slept without waking. The next afternoon, the air shifted. Elias was tightening the reins on his horse when the sound reached him. Distant hooves. His head snapped up. On the horizon, a line of dust thickened and grew. "Trouble," he muttered. Takina stepped outside and froze. 3 Apache riders approached slowly, faces painted for war. Their presence alone chilled the air. The lead rider spoke. "Our woman is here. Hand her over." Takina's hand slid instinctively to the knife at her side. Elias stepped forward, placing himself between her and the riders. The Winchester rested easily in his grip. "She's injured. She stays until she's healed." Another rider snarled. "She was cast out. She has no right to breathe." Elias didn't blink. "Then you'll have to kill me first." Silence stretched tight as a drawn bow. Dust swirled around hooves. Takina stared at Elias's back, steady, unyielding. Finally, the lead rider lowered his spear. "We will return, next time, not alone." They turned and rode off, leaving the land heavy with threat. Takina's grip tightened until her knuckles whitened. Elias turned to her, eyes sharp. "They'll bring more." She met his gaze. Fear burned there, but so did something else. Resolve. That night, lantern light spilled across the yard as they worked together. Sandbags were stacked, windows barricaded, ammunition laid out. Takina moved with purpose, no longer a guest, no longer a survivor. She had chosen a side. 3 days later, red dust rose again. This time, it was not 3 riders, but nearly 20 circling the ranch like wolves. An elder rode forward, silver hair braided long, eyes cold as stone. "She belongs to the dust," he said. "Why do you keep her?" Elias raised the rifle. "Because she's alive, and she chooses to be here." A murmur rippled through the riders. Takina stepped forward. "I was punished for not bearing. Children, that is not dishonor." The elder studied her. "If you stay, you sever all ties." Takina nodded. "I choose life." The riders withdrew at sunset, but the warning was clear. At dawn, the council would return. As night fell, Takina stood beside Elias, watching the horizon. "I already died once," she said quietly. "I won't again." Elias tightened his grip on the rifle. By morning, everything would change. Dawn crept over the prairie like a blade, dragged slowly across the sky. The light was bronze and heavy, thick with the promise of violence. Elias Ward had not slept. He stood on the porch, Winchester loaded, boots planted firm in the dirt as if the land itself might shift beneath him. Behind him, Takina tightened the bandage on her shoulder. The wounds still burned, but her eyes were cold and focused. She tied her hair back, gripping a spear she had balanced and sharpened the night before. She was no longer hiding behind the cabin walls. She stepped out beside him. A low horn sounded across the plains. Then they came. Not a raiding party this time, but the full weight of judgment. More than 50 riders fanned out, surrounding the ranch in a wide circle. Their horses snorted and stamped, leather creaked, weapons glinted in the rising sun. At the center rode an elder with silver hair and a face carved by years of command. Behind him followed 2 older women wrapped in dark hides, the matriarchs, the ones whose voices decided who belonged and who was erased. The riders parted, forming a path to the gate. Takina walked forward on her own. She did not hide behind Elias. She stood shoulder to shoulder with him. One of the elder women spoke, her voice steady but heavy with finality. "Takina, daughter of the tribe, for the last time you are given a choice. Return with us and face judgment, or choose exile and sever all blood ties." The wind moved through the grass. Dust drifted across the yard. Takina lifted her chin. "I will not return. I choose life." A ripple of murmurs spread through the riders. Some gripped their spears tighter, others lowered their eyes. The elder woman nodded slowly. "Then from this moment, your name is removed from our lineage. You will not walk ancestral ground, but neither will you be hunted." The silver-haired elder turned his gaze to Elias, sharp as a blade. "You sheltered her. Her fate is now bound to yours." Elias did not flinch. "I understand." For a long moment no one moved. Then the elder raised his hand. One by one, the riders turned away, their hooves pounding the earth as they withdrew. Only when the dust settled did Takina exhale. She trembled, not from fear but release. Elias looked at her. "You chose a new life." She met his gaze. "No, I chose myself." That afternoon, the sky darkened without warning. Clouds rolled in fast, swallowing the sun. The first drops of rain struck the roof like whispered prayers. After weeks of drought, the land drank deeply. Takina stepped into the yard, lifting her face to the sky. Rain washed the dust from her skin, carrying away blood and memory alike. Elias watched her, understanding something he hadn't dared name before. She was no longer the woman he found broken in the desert. She was a warrior who had stood against her past and lived. "You can leave," he said quietly. "The road south still stands." Takina turned to him. "Do you want me to?" Elias shook his head slowly. "This ranch isn't meant for one ghost." For the first time, Takina smiled. They worked together through the rain, rebuilding, strengthening. By evening, the land looked changed, renewed. That night they sat by the fire. No words were needed. For the first time in years, Elias did not feel alone. And beyond the firelight, the prairie rested, knowing something new had taken root. The storm passed as suddenly as it had come. By morning, the prairie smelled of wet earth and promise. Sunlight broke through torn clouds, spilling gold across the ranch like a blessing long denied. Elias was already outside, resetting fence posts loosened by the rain. His movements were slow but steady, the rhythm of a man who knew land did not heal quickly, but it did heal. Takina stepped onto the porch, the wind tugging at her loose hair. The scars on her shoulders were still visible, but they no longer defined her. She picked up the heaviest log near the shed and carried it without strain, setting it beside Elias. He glanced at her once. "Horse pens next?" She nodded. They worked side by side through the morning. Elias drove posts deep into softened ground. Takina hauled timber, her strength bending stubborn wood into place. Sweat mixed with rain on their skin. No commands, no questions, just understanding. By midday, the ranch looked different, stronger, alive. They paused near the well. Elias handed her a canteen. She drank, then passed it back. Their fingers brushed, brief, unspoken. That evening, Takina cooked while Elias mended tack. The firelight painted her face warm and steady. She no longer moved like someone afraid of making noise. Later they sat outside as stars climbed into the sky. "Tomorrow," Elias said, "we start clearing the south field." Takina studied the land. Good soil. With work it will grow. Elias smiled faintly. Weeks passed. The ranch changed in ways Elias had not imagined possible. Windbreaks rose, crops took hold, the cattle grew calmer, laughter, quiet, rare, real, found its way into the cabin. Takina proved more than strong. She was patient, thoughtful. She taught Elias which herbs eased pain, how to read the sky before storms. In return, he taught her the land beyond tribal borders, the unspoken rules of survival among settlers. One night, sitting near the fire, Takina spoke softly. "All my life I was told my worth was what I could give others." Elias stared into the flames. "That's a lie men tell when they're afraid of strength." She looked at him then, not as a savior, not as refuge, but as an equal. Spring arrived early. Green pushed through brown. Life reclaimed the scars of drought. One morning, Takina stood in the field, hands on her hips, surveying what they had built. "This is a home," she said. Elias nodded. "It is." They did not speak of love. Not yet. Some things needed roots before names. Months later, a rider passed by the ranch road and slowed. He watched the smoke rising from the chimney. The sight of a woman and a man working together, without chains, without fear, was something rare in these lands. Elias saw him and did not reach for his rifle. The rider tipped his hat and moved on. That night, Elias lit a fire in the yard. Takina set her spear aside, laying it gently against the cabin wall. A promise made without words. They sat together beneath a sky full of stars. Sometimes we do not choose where we come from, but we always choose where we stand. And sometimes, standing beside another soul, against the weight of the world, is how a true home is born. Thank you for listening to this story on Legend of West. If this tale stirred something in you, dusty sunsets, hard choices, and the courage to begin again, then stay with us. Subscribe to Legend of West, and tomorrow we'll ride once more into another story of the Wild West.